Hello everybody and welcome to another Jakarta Tech Talk. Whether you're joining us from the KubeCon, Cloud Native Con North America, or you're a regular Tech Talk attendee, thanks for being here today. We're extremely lucky to have presenting to us why Jakarta EE developers are first-class citizens on Azure, Reza Rahman. Reza is a Jakarta EE ambassador and the principal program manager of Java on Azure at Microsoft, as well as a distinguished speaker at many conferences. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat section in the bar on the right-hand side of your screen. And at this point, I'll turn it over. Take it away.
Okay. First of all, thank you for having me, and thank you folks for tuning in to this talk. Obviously, this is near and dear to my heart. This is essentially what I do at Microsoft in my day job as Principal Program Manager. So basically, this talk is about all of the work that we're doing in terms of what is possible for Jakarta EE or Java EE developers on Azure today, and what is it that we are working on primarily through our partnerships in the Java EE or Jakarta EE ecosystem. And the one thing that I wanted to point out is there's no reason to hold questions until very, very late. I think we'll be fine in terms of our time. So if you have questions, please post them throughout. Just so we have more of a dialogue going as opposed to simply me doing a lecture. So feel free to do that, and it's really not an issue. If you have any questions later on, if you want to get in touch with me later on, I will post the location of the slides. It's actually on Speaker Deck right now. If you look at my Speaker Deck account, this slide is already posted. My email address is there. Absolutely feel free to drop me an email whenever. Okay, so this is my plan for the next 50 or 60 minutes or so. I'll be talking to you a little bit about the Jakarta ecosystem context. Hopefully, most of us are already aware of this. I won't be spending a tremendous amount of time. But mostly this is to relay what we are looking at from a Microsoft standpoint into the Jakarta ecosystem, and basically our understanding of where are we operating, what is the context in which we are doing all of this work. Then I'll be spending a good deal of time talking to you about what are the current capabilities and what is the work that we are doing right now. What is the kind of things that you can take advantage of right now? And of course, what are we doing in the future? So what have we not done yet that is already on our roadmap? Now, before we do that, it's fair to acknowledge that typically Azure has not been, your prime destination for Jakarta EE developers for some number of years. But I think while saying that, you also have to turn around and say that we are now more than catching up. Right? So in fact, if you really take a look at an objective look at what we are doing, we're probably doing more for the Jakarta EE ecosystem on the cloud than most of the other cloud vendors, right? So while we're not directly contributing to the Jakarta EE specifications, we are indirectly contributing by making Azure a really good place to run these sorts of workloads, and also working with our partnerships to make sure that all of the good work that IBM is doing and Red Hat is doing and Oracle is doing, all of these other players are doing, are well represented on Azure as a sort of first-class cloud platform out in the world. So without further ado, let me move on into the ecosystem section. Jakarta EE is incredibly important. Most Jakarta EE developers don't actually realize this in their own, and they're working on in their own environment and their own application. Their application is important to them from a business standpoint, but in reality, this continues to be a very important technology industry-wide as well. When you take a more global approach and take a look at a global perspective on things. So still about 25 to 35% of existing and new applications out there are running on some kind of Jakarta EE application server or the other, whether that's WebLogic, WebSphere, JBoss EAP, WildFly, Payara. So that's a pretty significant footprint when you look at millions of Java developers out there. That's a good chunk of people really directly dependent on this technology platform. Now, even if you discount that, right? So when you look at these industry surveys and even in our own customer base in Azure, the reality is the vast majority of Java developers are in one shape or form or the other dependent on this technology set. Right? So they're using at least one or more of these APIs in their application somehow. Right? So whether it's using Tomcat or Jetty or Hibernate or ActiveMQ or Jersey or CXF, what have you. There's so many different ways in which Jakarta EE touches Java developers. It's really quite astounding. It's probably, other than Java SE, it's probably the second most important technology in the ecosystem in terms of the impact that it has. And a lot of these applications are moving to the cloud. Not all of them. It seems to be a little bit behind the curve in terms of Jakarta EE developers. If you look at Java developers as a whole, slightly less of that percentage is on the cloud in terms of Jakarta EE developers, but that is also changing. We've seen that in the surveys. People certainly have the trend of moving to the cloud as well. And these are the fundamental reasons why, from an Azure standpoint, it is very, very important to address this market properly. A little bit of a survey reference here. This is a 2020 Jakarta EE developer survey. I think it's particularly pertinent to Jakarta EE developers, obviously. There's some important trends here also that we are also noting. So again, Spring Boot, continues to be very, very important as well, right? So there's a whole suite of Spring on Azure work that we are doing to help support that ecosystem. But in terms of pure Jakarta EE, this is probably an overrepresentation a little bit, probably because of selection bias. But over here, we were talking about 35%. So in that range of people that are using Jakarta EE application servers of some kind that are reporting back, yes, that even in cloud native applications, they're using about a third, roughly a third of people are using that technology set. One interesting data point that I really find intriguing and something we are tracking actively is the interest, certainly, in Quarkus and microprofile. So we do have some support for that in Azure. We are probably going to beef up that support a little bit going forward as we see greater interest, especially in our own customer base, direct interest in technologies like Quarkus and the microprofile suite. Now, of course, as we all know, microprofile and Jakarta EE are not mutually exclusive. The Jakarta EE runtimes, pretty much all of them support microprofile as well. So interest in microprofile does not necessarily mean a fundamental shift for us strategy-wise quite yet, right? Because ultimately it's going to be the same sort of runtimes like OpenLiberty or Payara or WildFly that are supporting both technologies in the end. But there are exceptions like Quarkus, for example. Okay. So I think, again, we're all reasonably aware of what is going on in terms of the transition and why this is Jakarta EE, why we're referring to Jakarta EE developers as opposed to Java EE developers. I think Jakarta EE 8 was a reasonably successful release. We've not seen a tremendous amount of uptake yet in terms of Azure usage, but I think out in the wild, a decent number of folks, again, referring back to the survey, have in fact begun to adopt Jakarta EE 8. Hopefully that trend continues with Jakarta EE 9. So we're just a few weeks out of the Jakarta EE 9 release. Hopefully that will be out soon. And as you know, the primary objective there is to decouple from sort of the Oracle IP realm of influence, including copyright, right? So this truly decouples the technology away from the JCP legacy and sort of single vendor legacy into something a lot more open standard, but it will require the ecosystem to essentially adapt to this new namespace change. And of course, there's also Jakarta EE beyond whatever is beyond Jakarta EE 9 beginning to take shape in the horizon as well. And we're beginning to keep an eye on that. Our hope, I think, for all of us is that it strengthens the ecosystem further. So it not only maintains that third of market share, but maybe expands it a little bit more, or at least people that in general don't take Jakarta EE maybe as seriously as they should begin to understand its value proposition through innovations that hopefully will be brought about in things like Jakarta EE 9.1 and Jakarta EE 10. Okay. So this is an important little analysis actually to point out as well if you haven't seen it before. So this is the good folks at InfoQ. They put out a Java and JVM analysis every year. You can take a look at it. There's a short link to that in the slide deck. But as you can see here, it's in good shape. So it used to be the Jakarta EE and microprofile used to be in the innovators box. So it's progressing reasonably well. So now it's in the early adopters phase. And also, you'll note again those new type of purely microprofile-ish runtimes, Helidon and Quarkus. They're also moving along quite well in the early adopters phase. So what we hope to see is maybe next year, Jakarta EE and microprofile and some of these technology sets maybe move into the early majority phase. So that will be determined by what the uptake is and what the execution success is for these sorts of technologies going forward. So an evolving ecosystem, and I think the evolution is good and much needed. Obviously, between the Java EE and Jakarta EE transition, there's been sort of a stagnant period. So the more we move away from the stagnant period, the better it's going to be, and the more reason for Microsoft and Azure to take these technologies even more seriously and essentially begin to invest in them even more. So let's talk about the current state. So I'll talk about the current state in terms of a map, if you will. So I actually think about the work we're doing at Microsoft in terms of this map as well. So there's various different pathways when you're talking about the cloud that people can move into the cloud. It's not just a single shot deal. It's the cloud at the end of the day is all about flexibility and all about options. So there are options for Java developers, for Jakarta EE developers to be moving into Azure as well. The classical one is virtual machines. We'll talk about virtual machines in a moment in a bit more detail. Then there's containers, so things like OpenShift and Kubernetes and Docker. And then there is sort of the greatest abstraction level, which is PaaS, or platform as a service. And that is where you're not dealing with infrastructure at all. You're dealing with deployment artifacts. So you're just thinking about deploying your WAR files or EAR files and not bothering to do any installation or configuration of the underlying runtime or even management of the underlying runtime. So in virtual machines, we want to support all of the major platforms, Jakarta EE runtimes, JBoss EAP, WebLogic, WebSphere traditional, WildFly. In containers and OpenShift, or rather Kubernetes and OpenShift, again, we want to support all of the more modern runtimes here as well, including JBoss, WildFly, WebLogic Server, Payara, WebSphere Liberty, WebSphere Open Liberty, as opposed to WebSphere Traditional. And in terms of PaaS services, we do have a few offerings here as well. So we do have a managed JBoss EAP offering that actually just went in public preview. And in addition to that, we also have Azure Service Bus, that is basically our built-in messaging solution into the Azure platform. That actually is has a public preview of Jakarta messaging, or JMS, support within that service. We also have Redis. Redis is surprisingly popular amongst Java developers, and in fact, amongst Java EE developers as well. We find that out both in terms of our customer engagement as well as our surveys. And there's different ways of using Redis. So you can use Redis as a Hibernate or JPA second level cache. You can use it as an application server cache, and you can use it on its own right via the JCache API, right, inside of a Java EE application. So there's all these different use cases for our managed Redis offering. So again, we have a managed offering for Redis on Azure. So before I move forward, there's one specific call out that I want to do. As you'll see in a moment, where we are in this map is in various different places. We have various bits of progress being made. Some are pretty near complete, some are still being completed. But one vendor actually really stands out in terms of the way they support Azure, where we really haven't needed to do anything with them. So we do have a partnership with these folks, but really they're way ahead of the game in terms of enabling their runtime to work on Azure and doing all of the groundwork necessary to do that, and that is Payara. So the Payara folks have a number of guides in order to how to effectively run Payara as a runtime on Azure. Really, as I said, didn't need to do much of anything with them in terms of the work that we are doing with some of the other vendors. So for that reason, we won't be covering Payara too much going forward. It's sort of taken for granted, if you will. Now, in terms of workloads, where we see Payara most frequently is on AKS. So I didn't specifically call it out anywhere else, but certainly it's a legitimate and very reasonably frequent use case of using Payara on the Azure Kubernetes service. Okay. So moving forward, let's talk a little bit about virtual machines. So this is the grandfather of the cloud, if you will. So this is nothing much more than sort of that stereotype of your data center on somebody else's machine, right? So this is really running these virtual machines in their raw form on Azure as opposed to on your own data center. Is the easiest pathway, especially for lift and shift type of workloads. Virtual machines are very easy. They're very familiar in terms of their technology set and capabilities to what you may have in your on-premise data center today. And really, the virtual machines are the linchpin of supporting Jakarta EE on Azure, and even more broadly speaking, Java on Azure. So a lot of people probably remember that announcement from Satya Nadella, sort of that marketing push of Microsoft loves Linux. And that is really fundamentally what is powering a lot of the work that we are doing and talking about right now. So in addition to Windows, basically, Azure provides support for all of the major Linux distributions, whether that's Ubuntu or SUSE or Debian or Red Hat or Oracle Linux. And all of the work that we do, whether it's in containers or PaaS or what have you, really builds upon that foundation of supporting Linux on Azure. Now, when you're talking about JVM-based solutions on Azure, there's a couple of different flavors. So one is what's called these base virtual images. So this is nothing much more than sort of that, let's say, WildFly or JBoss EAP or Linux, nothing much more than the operating system, a basic working instance of that stack, including the operating system, the JVM, and the application server. Now, we do have those base images as well. We'll talk about that in a second. But in addition to that, another capability that Azure has that is not very well understood is the concept of solution templates. And what that is that it's another layer of abstraction that's not quite PaaS, but what it allows you to do is basically take these base images and do something useful with them. So in other words, create a single working instance or create a cluster, including load balancing, integrate with various Azure services. These are the kind of things that a solution template does above and beyond just basic virtual machine images. So they basically make the VM solutions a little bit more useful and a little bit more usable. So that when you run these templates, you end up with something useful that speeds up your migration to virtual machines. So we have a few of these solution templates right now. So in this area, I would say the picture is a little bit mixed. The strongest story so far is WebLogic on Azure. So we've been working with Oracle to enable the WebLogic on Azure story. So we have a joint offering of both virtual machine images for WebLogic on Azure. So we have a number of WebLogic versions supported in a predictable way with Oracle Linux, Oracle JDK, and WebLogic. But above and beyond that, we've also invested in creating the solution templates as well. So this is, if you look into the Azure Marketplace and you look for WebLogic, you'll see all of these solution templates and base images. They're all published, maintained, and supported jointly by both Microsoft and Oracle. So from your standpoint, if you're using Azure, it's literally just using, it's almost as though it's the same one and the same vendor. And of course, other than the base images, we support other use cases like single running instance with the admin server, load balancing capabilities built into it with Azure App Gateway, as well as getting a cluster, a static or dynamic cluster of WebLogic instances up and running quickly. Now, other than that, we are also supporting integrations out of the box. So you'll see in the screenshot, we have different blades representing the different integrations that we support. So we support easy integration with various databases. So on Azure, namely Azure SQL, Azure PostgreSQL, and Oracle DB, either running on virtual machines or even potentially running on the Oracle Cloud. Right. So if you have a database running on the Oracle Cloud, you can interconnect. You can use Azure Interconnect to basically again have it as though it is just a single data center. So it's a very fast, secure connection between OCI and Azure. And we also have built-in integration with Azure Active Directory. So the major release for this is already out. We're essentially supporting, as I said, some of the key integrations and key use cases. We will have more releases. In particular, we want to also support Elastic as a distributed logging solution, as well as support coherence. So currently, we do not have built-in support for coherence in the solution template. So you have to, if you want a coherence cluster on top of your WebLogic cluster, you need to create that yourself. But we're also thinking of baking that into the solution template as well. So we also have similar support, and you can use basically the solution templates for container-based solutions as well in the same way, in order to ease migration into the container world. So that's what we're looking to do right at this moment as well, is also support WebLogic on the Azure Kubernetes service in the same way. So for all of these things, we need feedback, engagement. We need people to try these things out. If they're doing migrations, we'd like to work hand in hand with them in terms of those migrations and figure out how exactly could we better support them, how good are the solutions that we are developing, how useful they are. So I've posted a link here. In fact, I'll post links to each of the things that I'll talk about in terms of our capabilities geared towards the Jakarta EE ecosystem and Jakarta EE developers. And you'll see the solution description there, but there'll also be a link to engage with us, and I'll actually share that link specifically towards the end of the talk. So containers obviously are all the rage. So in fact, virtual machines are still tremendously popular. It's probably the most popular way of moving to the cloud still, believe it or not. But containers are catching up very, very quickly, right? So there's tremendous amount of interest around things like Docker and Kubernetes. And Azure provides very, very good support for that. So you're definitely first-class citizen in containerization if you are on Azure. So we have one of the best runtimes for Kubernetes. It's called the Azure Kubernetes Service. So it's a managed service, a managed Kubernetes service built into Azure. On top of that, we also have Azure Container Registry. Typically, when you're doing these production mission critical workloads on Azure, you want a private repository. So Azure comes with a built-in private repository, Docker repository called the Azure Container Registry. Now, another very interesting thing above and beyond Docker and Kubernetes is actually the use case where a lot of people want to just use Docker and not necessarily Kubernetes. So they want to move into containerization, but maybe they have a very simple workload and they don't require all of the orchestration capabilities that Kubernetes comes with. So Azure has good solutions for that as well. One of the key ones is something called App Service for Containers. App Service is something we'll talk about in a second a little bit more as well. It's basically the generic PaaS platform for Azure. But one of those capabilities in App Service is being able to deploy a Docker image and essentially have that be running transparently on the cloud as well. It's very close to a PaaS, with the abstraction being that as opposed to deploying WAR files or EAR files, you're really deploying a Docker image. So you've Dockerized your application in one way or the other. In general, the way app servers support things like Docker and Kubernetes is by providing published and validated artifacts like Docker images at a very basic level, Helm charts in order to ease things like clustering management and complex deployments on Kubernetes, as well as Kubernetes operators to do some of the work that traditionally domain managers have done on a cluster. So Kubernetes really takes a key role to supplement or in some cases replace the domain manager functionality. And what the Kubernetes operator does is that it uses those same kind of capabilities that were available on-premise on Kubernetes and still makes those domain management capabilities possible that way, right? So these are the sort of artifacts that you should look from a cloud vendor, from a Jakarta EE vendor to provide, and in fact, they in general do that, right? So these artifacts are available for all of the major application servers already. So JBoss EAP, WildFly, WebLogic, WebSphere Open Liberty, Payara, they all provide these sorts of all of these artifacts, so to fully enable you in a containerized environment. In particular, you have to say the WebLogic and WebSphere and OpenLiberty offerings are particularly strong in terms of the type of artifacts that they provide in order to enable you in a containerized environment. Again, in this case, just like VMs, one point of view is, okay, so I have a virtual machine at the operating system level, and I have my Docker and Kubernetes, and that's all you need. Well, that's a legitimate way of thinking about it. There are things we can do to improve those experiences as well, and that is in fact what we have been working on in terms of the application server vendors. So we are part of the way there. So again, where we are in terms of our strongest offering on AKS so far is again WebLogic and our partnership via Oracle. So we actually just did a major release for this just in about time for this particular talk. And what we've done is we've basically taken the WebLogic operator, WebLogic Helm charts, WebLogic Docker images, and make sure they run extremely well and certify them on AKS. And in fact, we've done that with Oracle. So in process of doing that, we've also provided detailed guidance, scripts, and samples exactly how to do WebLogic on AKS. It's reasonably non-trivial in many of the cases, which is why you need additional guidance and additional tooling to make that simpler. And we've put all of that guidance, scripts, and samples right into the WebLogic operator. So if you go into the WebLogic operator, you'll see those samples there right at this moment. Today, the samples are basically doing some level of Azure integration. So certainly integration with AKS, integration with Azure files as persistence volume, as well as Azure load balancing. Just like we've done for virtual machines, we also want to further make the use case as simple as possible. So you should be able to run a solution template and be able to get up and running with a WebLogic installation running on AKS, potentially with some of the integrations that we talked about. So app gateway, databases, Elastic Stack. All of these things potentially should be PaaS-like, and that is actually what we're working towards beginning early next year. So you'll begin to see some of those offerings as well. Again, feel free to take a look at the link over here, try it out, see if it works for you, engage with us if you have a migration case. We're always very happy to hear from you. Okay, so OpenShift is started a bit slow in terms of its adoption, but it is warming up. Right. So what is OpenShift if you haven't heard it before? In a nutshell, OpenShift is an abstraction above and beyond Kubernetes. So Kubernetes provides essentially basic infrastructure and management abstractions. Well, OpenShift is yet another abstraction above that. So this level of abstraction provides a little bit of ease of use, but it also enables some use cases a bit better than Kubernetes does. So it enables the cases where you have multiple cloud providers and you're using just one console and one deployment experience across them that allows you to move between cloud providers by using that same deployment experience, same deployment interface. It provides hybrid cloud deployment, so you could have part of your deployment on-premise and part of it on the cloud. It could be an easy pathway from moving from on-premise to the cloud. So it enables a bunch of different use cases by providing a uniform level of abstraction above and beyond Kubernetes. So we're one of the actually first clouds outside of Red Hat to provide a managed OpenShift offering. So this is called Azure Red Hat OpenShift. That is also fully enabled and has been mature for some time. Again, you could, in theory, run application servers that provide Kubernetes-based artifacts on OpenShift. But again, there are cases where we really could help out by providing additional guidance and tooling, and that is basically what we're working on. Now, over here, where we are leading with is WebSphere Liberty and OpenLiberty. We're very, very close to actually having our first release of guidance on how to run WebSphere Liberty and OpenLiberty on OpenShift. I was hoping we were going to be done with that in time for this talk, but not the case, unfortunately. We're still a few weeks out before we can really test and validate and make sure that that offering is solid, and before we can announce it. So please stay tuned. That is something we're going to be offering very, very soon, probably again in just a few weeks. Okay. So I do want to talk about a little bit about JBoss EAP on App Service. So again, to remind, App Service is basically our PaaS tier on Azure. It's basically provides all kinds of managed runtimes. JBoss EAP on App Service being one of them. So literally, what you do is you have a simple CLI experience or a Maven-based experience or an experience in the Azure portal that allows you to very quickly deploy JBoss EAP and deploy your ER and WAR files without needing to worry about infrastructure or managing infrastructure. So this is like most of the work that we are doing. We're doing this as a partnership. So in this time, we're partnership with Red Hat and Microsoft to make this offering. So right now, this is essentially stateless. So it will not support clustering at the moment, or rather, JBoss EAP native clustering at the moment, but it will do load balancing. It will auto deploy across multiple JBoss EAP instances. It is auto scaled. So based on demand, you can increase or decrease the size of your JBoss EAP instances per deployment. It is monitored. So essentially, the control plane is a JBoss EAP. You can think of it again as sort of a replacement of the domain manager functionality provided by Azure in this case. So it does use standalone configuration by default and adds the JBoss EAP on App Service Management plane on top of that. But you can further customize the domain configuration using CLI. So you're not locked into a particular configuration. You can still configure JBoss EAP basically any which way you want, just like you potentially would do in a VM-based solution. So this will go GA or production ready fairly soon, probably sometime early next year. But this is a really good time to get engaged with it, right? Because if you get engaged with it, get engaged with this offering right now, you're able to take advantage of the engineering team that's working on the solution. So you're not just another customer that's anonymous. You can actually, in a very direct fashion, work with the exact engineering team at Microsoft that is working on the solution right at this moment. So I do have a link there if you're interested in trying that out and giving us some feedback on the JBoss EAP on App Service offering. Okay. So another interesting one for Jakarta EE developers is Jakarta Messaging or JMS support for Azure Service Bus. Now, a lot of people aren't familiar with Azure Service Bus. They're more familiar with ActiveMQ or MQ series or what have you. Azure Service Bus actually has been around for a little while as well, and it provides essentially equivalent functionality for message-oriented middleware. Now, traditionally, it's been more focused on the .NET ecosystem. But what we've seen is that there's a tremendous amount of demand for a managed JMS solution on Azure. So what we've done here is basically provide a JMS interoperability support with Service Bus, right? So you can use the JCA adapters in with most of the application servers and be able to make it work. Make Azure Service Bus your JMS provider, external JMS provider for your application server. The way this is possible actually, and actually has been possible for some time, is because Azure Service Bus actually implements the AMQP protocol. And there's a library out there called Keep-It-For-JMS that provides a bridge between AMQP and JMS, right? So, but the gap that had been there for some time is that Service Bus actually did not fully support JMS, right? So what we're doing now is making sure that we pass the Jakarta Messaging TCK and that the Service Bus fully implements all of the capabilities within JMS, right? So if you're not using JMS, there are other ways of as a Java developer, accessing Service Bus as well. So we do have some proprietary client libraries that are non-JMS, that are Java-based client libraries. You can use those. And if you're using Azure Functions, and Azure Functions is basically the serverless solution for Azure, which also provides Java bindings. You can also use Azure Service Bus through the Azure Functions way as well, right? Of directly communicating with Azure Service Bus. That way, again, that's a non-JMS way of interacting with a Service Bus as a Java developer. So I posted the basic guidance to do this, right? If you're interested in doing this, if you follow the link, you'll see how you can get started. And again, this is an area where we could use more engagement from the community. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of a demo here. So this is sort of a lowest common denominator, not very complex, but a representative sample of how you could run Azure. I do this with customers, and they're always sort of surprised that Azure can even do this sort of thing. So let me show you what this is. So it's a very simple demo, but the key part of this demo is that all of it is available on GitHub, right? So you can basically follow these GitHub instructions and get the application up and running by yourself, right? So without any necessarily help from anybody else. So it's very simple. It's just a Java EE CRUD application right at this moment. In this case, the example is running WildFly on the Azure Kubernetes service, fairly popular combination. And we're using a simple managed database, in this case, a managed Postgres instance, and we're using Azure DevOps pipelines, and that is sort of an Azure native version of Jenkins, if you will. So it provides CI/CD capabilities. And also application insights, and again, that's sort of a Azure flavored equivalent of Elastic capabilities. And then I'll show you these things in just a moment as well. So you can do the setup by yourself. So all you need is a GitHub account. You'll need an Azure subscription to do this because you're using Azure. You can get that for 1 year for free if you don't have one. And you'll need a few other things to get started. All of it you can get started for free, basically. So other than that, there's step-by-step instructions on how to start a managed PostgreSQL instance on Azure. I'll show you that in action once I log on onto the Azure portal. I'll show you how that looks like once it's all set up. We're going to use a Azure Kubernetes service cluster, and you're going to connect to the Kubernetes tooling, namely kubectl, to control that Kubernetes backplane and access it. And I'll show you that in a demo in a moment as well. There's also Azure Application Insights. I'll show you how that looks like. Again, that is basically the observability and management capability built into Azure. And then we actually will use Azure DevOps pipelines to deploy the application, and I'll show you that in a moment as well. So there's a few things that I haven't done in the demo yet. I certainly would welcome PRs to make some of these things happen. Namely, I want to integrate Azure Active Directory as a security solution for the application, Redis as potentially a cache, a Service Bus, again, using JMS capabilities of Service Bus, and potentially some some closer integration with Kubernetes using the microprofile health check APIs. So I guess I've been talking for a little while, so I do want to pause a little bit and make sure there's no questions before I sort of dive into the code a little bit and show you the demo. Okay, so any questions so far?
Yeah, there was one question. Just if you look in the Ask a Question tab, or just in that comment that I have in front of you there from Fareed.
Okay, let me look through this. So let me first look at the Ask a Question, just to respect the effort to do that. Java SE9 JPMS allowed developer, among other things, to pick and choose only needed SE technology and create custom GRE runtimes that is similar to expected in EE application service space. Okay, so the reality is that JPMS has not really taken off that much, right? So this is something that we keep talking about in the Jakarta EE space. But the reality is, what has happened is that Java EE application servers have actually superseded what JPMS provides, because they've long supported things like Glassfish have natively supported OSGI, which is a much more powerful modularization capabilities solution as compared to JPMS. So there's a small possibility that probably some incremental work will be done in Jakarta E9 and 10, namely to just provide module info for each of the specifications. And for people that are really insistent on using JPMS, they could follow that path and sort of build their own runtime. For the application servers themselves, it would be a step backward, actually. So if you look at some of the capabilities in WildFly or Glassfish or probably Open Liberty, and WebSphere Liberty is the poster child for this, they've gone much farther than that, right? So you can really build up, for example, Open Liberty from scratch. You can start from Open Liberty Core, which is really nothing much more than just the TCP/IP level protocol layer, and you can build up and you can add in whatever Java EE APIs you need above and beyond that. In addition to that, Open Liberty also supports profiles. Right? So if you want to just enable just a full profile, you don't have to go through the steps of enabling every single technology one by one. You can just enable the whole profile. There are similar capabilities again in Glassfish, and similar capabilities in WildFly through the JBoss module system. So it is, in fact, already there. So it's a little bit of a misconception, in my opinion, that somehow the Java ecosystem hasn't embraced modularity when, in fact, it has. And in fact, if you look into things like even in the microprofile space, they've gone even a step further, right, and towards the modularity. They don't even have a profile capability. They just start by, you take your Maven capabilities and add each of these APIs one by one. So it has already happened, right? In fact, embracing JPMS now would, if anything, would be a step backward. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Okay, so that's the same question from Farid Goliev. We have another question from, another question from Farid is, do you think Java EE servers will eventually mutate into lightweight frameworks? In my opinion, Java EE is already a lightweight framework. There's no other technology where you're be able to write extremely thin vars and have very, very fast deployments. So even if you look at something like WebLogic, which is probably the extreme edge case of not supporting modularity, even if you're using WebLogic, it still plays extremely well with things like containerization, and you'll see that when you look at the AKS examples, WebLogic and AKS examples that we put out. In no other technology will you be so easily be able to have fast deployments based on containerization technology, because it allows for that thin var capability. So, in my opinion, Java EE is already lightweight. Okay, so Farid, Reza, I'm sure would have his own take on this. And so this is a comment from Scott Cruz of IBM. From IBM, I'm sure have his own take on this. In the meantime, I think it is fair to say that the idea of standardization of other profiles has come up, but I think it remains to be seen if this will be prioritized from a Jakarta EE spec perspective. Also, I do work for IBM and Open Liberty, WebSphere Liberty, so we'll know that Liberty configuration model allows you to pick and choose to only start the exact feature set that you wish to use. Okay, so Scott is basically answering the same question. Yes, in terms of EE profiles, we can investigate, for example, a microservices profile. All right, so similar to the 4 specs that microprofile uses, right? We could standardize those and say, hey, that is a fully supported and established profile for Jakarta EE as well. And that, I don't think you can get much more lightweight than that. In the bare minimum and most applications, you'll need at least those 4 specifications to write anything useful. We should really start calling it Jakarta EE. Yeah, I agree. I think Java EE is now a thing of the past, right? Officially. It's been officially superseded by Jakarta EE, so we definitely need the awareness of that fact, right? That Java EE is no more. We're really all moving into a different technology that is much more open and much more collaborative than Java EE used to. Okay. Any other questions before I move into? So actually, we're running a little bit short of time, so I'm going to actually skip the demo, and because I have some other important things that I do want to talk to you about in the next 15 minutes. But I definitely don't want to stop the dialogue, right? So if anybody has any other anything else they want to talk about, I'm happy to talk about that also. I was like, not so far. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over the demo. I think feel free to take a look at the demo. I think it's reasonably interesting enough, especially if you haven't used Azure before. It'll give you a flavor of how to deal with the Azure resource allocations and configuration. But I think I'm going to jump back up into the presentation, since we don't have actually a lot of time. But if you want to take a look at the demo and you want to try it out yourself, the GitHub repository link is posted in the slide deck as well. Okay, so let's talk about roadmap. So I've already said there's some areas where we've made very good progress. So WebLogic on virtual machines, I think, is in reasonably good shape. Our JBoss EAP on app service capability, I think, is going to be a very key one for empowering Jakarta EE developers on Azure. And that is also in reasonably good shape. Again, it will probably go generally available sometime early next year. And then meanwhile, this is a good time to engage with the team if you want to work on that. And similarly, the JMS support for Azure Service Bus is actually in very good shape. Also, probably by the end of this year, we'll be announcing that, yes, Azure Service Bus is fully compatible with Jakarta messaging. So there's some other areas where we're working on still. So JBoss EAP on virtual machines, WildFly on virtual machines is something we're working on. I'll talk about that in just a moment. We're beginning to work with IBM to enable WebSphere traditional ND on virtual machines as well. Similarly, we're working to enable JBoss EAP on OpenShift. So the basic image is already published in Azure Red Hat OpenShift, but that again could use further guidance on how to use that. As I mentioned, we're already working on that guidance for WebSphere Liberty and Open Liberty. Again, in a few weeks, we'll have our initial release of that support, similar to what we have for WebLogic on AKS in terms of guidance, samples, and in general certification, joint certification between Oracle and Microsoft. Obviously, we'll be beefing that up and bringing that up to the level where we have for the solution templates for Azure virtual machines. There's a few areas where there's identified gaps that we know that is on our horizon, and we will work to essentially to make that not be gaps as soon as possible. So that would be enabling WebSphere Liberty on AKS. Again, this is in a short time horizon. We've already begun to talk with our partners at IBM to enable just this, and also enabling JBoss EAP on AKS. So there is a fair amount of use cases where that also happens. And finally, enabling Redis. So enabling all those use cases that I talked about, using it as a Hibernate or JPS second level cache, using it in application server level cache. For example, Open Liberty would support this very, very easily. And also using Azure Redis just as a JCache provider inside of your Java EE applications. So those are areas that we want to unblock as well. Okay, so briefly I want to talk about where we are just one level deeper with our Azure WebLogic and Azure Virtual Machines roadmap. So we have enabled a number of integrations. So this would be databases, single cluster, a single instance or cluster use cases, integration with Azure App Gateway as a load balancer, integration with the Azure Active Directory. But there are a few things missing. So we want to enable coherence, as we mentioned, through the solution templates. We also want to enable connectivity with Azure Managed Elastic Service for distributed logging for WebLogic. This is a very common use case for WebLogic. And also see if we can provide above and beyond the solution templates some very simplistic migration tools where you take an existing deployment and sort of automatically try to port it over to Azure IaaS. So that is also something we are looking to enable in the near future. Okay, so WebLogic on AKS, again, we talked about some of the basic integrations that we have in place right now. So Azure Files as a persistence mechanism, as well as getting a simple cluster up and running on AKS. Obviously, we want to enable the full host of solutions there as well, similar to what we're planning to do for the solution templates for WebLogic on VMs. So again, in our WebSphere Open Liberty OpenShift roadmap, we're very close to getting the cluster guidance up and running so that it's usable very easily by you, both for WebSphere Liberty and Open Liberty. We've also done some initial work to enable the Azure Active Directory integration with WebSphere Liberty and Open Liberty. I believe I put a blog entry out there. Some of you might have noticed that already. But again, in our general pipeline, we want to enable all of these integrations, probably through a marketplace solution template mechanism. Above and beyond providing a simple guidance, all of these other integrations, we want to make sure it's as easy as possible. It's almost like a PaaS-like experience where you point and click, and all of these use cases should just work for you. And one of the interesting ones being using Azure Redis as a JCache provider as a Liberty or WebSphere Liberty application server level cache. Right? Okay. So here's where we are with the JBoss EAP and WildFly on virtual machines work. So this is also a work in progress. So there is a number of use cases being supported right now. So these would be standalone virtual machine, cluster of JBoss EAP, and a cluster of JBoss EAP on what's called virtual machine scale sets. So it's similar. It provides some level of dynamism in terms of upward and downward scaling. And because of JBoss EAP auto discovery, that is actually possible. So currently, these are community quick start templates. So they're a step below what you would have in terms of a solution template, but you can begin to use them and begin to engage the team to see, what if it's useful or not, and what type of use cases would you like to see out of it. But hopefully by the end of this year, these will also become jointly supported marketplace solution template offerings jointly published by Microsoft and Red Hat. Right? So hopefully that will come about. But in the meanwhile, you can use the community quick start templates. There's a link to those. Okay. So I do want to finish up. We have about 10 minutes. I do want to leave some time for Q&A. If not, I'll show you the demo in the last 10 minutes or so. So to summarize, there is a dedicated team working on your behalf to make Jakarta EE developers successful on Azure. We do want to make sure that you are first-class citizens, and Azure is a very good home for you. But frankly, we need your help to do that, right? So the more engagements we have, the more we have people trying out these solutions and giving us feedback on our roadmap on what's working and what isn't and what they would like to see, that's what's going to accelerate this work. So please consider doing that, right? So the way you do that is very simple. It is just this survey. You fill out the survey, we get in touch with you, and we begin to work with you in terms of enabling all these solutions. So again, the objective here is to provide a robust guidance and tooling for migrating Jakarta applications to Azure using either containers or virtual machines for the major application servers. So this would be WebLogic, WebSphere Liberty, JBoss EAP, WildFly. So we already have a managed PaaS well on the way. I think that really speaks to Jakarta EE developers being first-class citizens on Azure. So JBoss EAP on App Service. And will also, through all of this work and beyond, enable more and more of these integrations. So a good example of that, again, is the Azure Service Bus support for JMS. Similarly, we want to meet all of the common use cases for Jakarta EE developers, whether that's directory server, database, caching, distributed logging, messaging, whatever it is. Right? So ultimately, my major, if you take away one thing, please consider doing this. You or your friends or your colleagues, engage with us, fill out the survey, tell us what kind of thing you would like us to work on through that survey, and potentially also work with us one-on-one to enable these use cases. That is the most effective thing. That is the most effective way how we make Jakarta EE a first-class thing and a truly polished, great experience for everyone out there. So I'll leave you with some resources. I think I won't bother going through these one by one. Basically, all of these are various announcements of things that I already talked about during the talk. I'll give you a little bit more detail of what is out there and what is in the roadmap above and beyond this talk. And lastly, there's also another demo that I won't show you that actually takes various flavors, not just the one use case of WildFly on AKS, but various flavors of PaaS, IaaS, and Kubernetes, and shows you how each of those look like. So you can compare each of those approaches. So that's another GitHub repository on my personal account. It's the last one link there, so feel free to take a look at that. Okay, so I have about 5 or 6 minutes. So let me stop here and see if there's any questions. If not, I'll try to quickly show you the at least a little bit portion of the demo. Okay, so this is the same question from Fareed. So Fareed, I think we should take this offline. So there's really nothing wrong with the model that Java EE application servers have been using. In fact, if you look at things like Spring Boot, in fact, Spring Boot is following that approach now of introducing the concept of layering, within Java EE application servers. And again, things like OpenLiberty and WildFly, they already support modularization, right? So if you're specifically talking about fat jar based deployment, even that is supported, right? So if you look at OpenLiberty or the recent support for deployable jar files in WildFly or Payara Micro, all of those actually support. I think what you're really talking about is embedding the application and the application server together. So I would ask that you investigate a little bit more. In fact, a lot of the things you're talking about may already be possible in the Jakarta EE ecosystem. So any other questions? No, any other questions at all from anybody else? This is your last opportunity, folks. You can obviously email me later or find me on Twitter or what have you. But if you have any questions, this is a good time for us to chat one-on-one. Would be nice to see Microsoft Jakarta compatible application server, definitely, right? So that is something we are obviously considering, right? But at this moment, I think it's a little bit premature, right? So I think we first need to do our homework in terms of enabling the existing runtimes to run well on Azure, first of all, and also make sure that we are serving the customers that are using those runtimes before we did our own, if you will. I think once we did that and we have a good cohort of real Jakarta EE developers on Azure, I think next thing we can absolutely look into is see if it makes sense for us to also have our own compatible application server. I think doing that now is probably a little bit putting the cart before the horse, if you will. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so I don't have a tremendous amount of time. Let me just quickly show you a little bit of the demo that I was going to show you before. So I'm going to log on onto the Azure portal. Okay, these are the resources that I have already deployed. You'll go through the instructions and deploy these resources yourself. So I have an AKS cluster. So this is a cluster of Azure Kubernetes service already running. Let me go back and look here, and we also have a database. So this is Postgres running, Azure database for Postgres server, as you can see. And also we have application insights. All right. So I did a little bit of testing a little bit earlier. So I'll show you the output of that. So I need to go to logs. You can go through logs here. Okay, and the one we're after is actually tracing. So I'll look at traces and run them. And let me see if I can show you, maybe I need to minimize my screen a bit. Okay, so if you look closely here, these are all of the log messages that have come out of my applications. Finding all coffees, removing a coffee number 2. So these are all of the log level messages. It's coming from logback, as you can see all of those details in here. So again, the database, the Azure Kubernetes service, as well as you can see, application insights. I do have it hooked up here. So if you look at get pods, I have 2 instances of WildFly up and running. If you can see my screen, I can do get services. So if you look at services, I have Kubernetes itself running. I also have a load balancer running for Azure Cafe. There is an external IP for this. If I just plug in this external IP into my browser, there's WildFly up and running on an AKS instance. I can actually access the application itself. It's super simple. You can take a look at it a bit later. And there's the application. It's a simple CRUD application. It's just, you can delete an entry and recreate it here. Okay, so there you have it. It's there you have a Java EE running on Azure Kubernetes service on Azure. Okay, so I think I'm right at the top of the hour. I'll just take one last opportunity to see if there's any questions. Otherwise, I thank you for attending this talk, and hopefully hope to see you on Azure.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that presentation. At this point, yeah, we are just at the top of the hour, so great timing on that. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. If you are on your way out, please consider filling out the call to action at the bottom, that green button that says help us improve by completing the post-event survey. It would be great to get some feedback and see how we can continue to grow the Jakarta Tech Talk series moving forward. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.